director and the co-founder of Magical Bridge Foundation and Magical Bridge Playgrounds. We are so incredibly grateful to have you join us today as we discuss disability and inclusive strategies during COVID-19. We hope everyone is safe and healthy and sheltering in place right now, wherever you are. A quick introduction, Magical Bridge Playgrounds and Foundation. We create playgrounds for absolutely everyone, regardless of your ability or your disability or your size or your age. We welcome everyone. The only playground in the ground at the moment is in Palo Alto, California, and Silicon Valley and Mitchell Park. We actually are working on 11 projects throughout the Bay Area and worldwide.
Wow.
We certainly love for you to come visit us on our website, magicalbridge.org. But we wanted to offer a way to get together with thought leaders, especially those who have expertise with disabilities and the disability community. And so graciously, Shannon partnered with us from Thinking Person's Guide to Autism so we could bring this webinar to you. Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Jill. So we're so excited that everybody's here today. We want to also acknowledge that we are all stressed right now, and that's okay. We want to clarify that although our participants and their children represent a range of disability experiences, we are also aware that we do not represent people from all racial and economic backgrounds, and we hope to address that in future webinars, just like we are hoping to address any unaddressed issues in this webinar and future webinars. But we recommend organizations like the Disability Justice Club and the Disability Visibility Project for people who have other perspectives and feel like we are not representing them. We also wanted to say that thanks to Maxfield Sparrow of UnstrangeMind, we currently have closed captions available. So if you need closed captions, you can turn them on from the bottom of your screen. And if it seems like we're speaking slowly, that is the reason, because our intrepid captioneer needs to be able to have the time to transcribe the captions. So I'm now going to turn it over to Deborah Vick, who is going to do our introduction to the webinar's goals. Deborah?
Deborah, we can't hear you.
Unmute. So we're still very new at this, so please be a little patient with us as we're all starting to learn these new technologies and ways of communicating with one another. First, I would love to.
Deborah, I'm sorry to interrupt. It looks like some folks are having trouble that they're not seeing the video on Zoom. Can we make sure that we are live?
We are live. I can see the 73 participants, and I can see us on Facebook.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. Hold on one second. Typically, if someone's not seeing a video, it's because you're likely on a device where you have to swipe the screen or change the screen views. There's a couple different screen views on Zoom, and there's a video one. There's a speaker person-oriented window, so you can change that around. Back to today. I really thank you so much for everybody who has attended. This is just amazing. We're surprised to see so many people already joining us. And I want to express great gratitude to Jill and Shannon for putting this together, as well as my co-panelists. Over the past few weeks, we've been working pretty hard to get our ideas and concepts together, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I thank everybody up here who is here to help us out today. My goal, or actually our goals today, is to first help validate and recognize that we are all having challenges. This is a challenging time being together in our communities as a whole, and as our communities individually in our homes. It's a challenging time for us, and we want to recognize that as parents, as educators, and as individual people who might have someone disabled in their home. Together today, one of the things that we're going to have a unique experience is that our panelists are disability advocates as well as parents of children with disabilities. So we have a little bit of a unique experience in our ideas and concepts, and we want to share some things that have worked for us and some ideas and knowledge and resources that are out there for you, in the hopes that this helps empower you and gives you ideas of what you can do at home and in the future. And most of all, we want us to all end today with a sense of feeling that we're part of a larger magical community.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Now, before we get into the question and answers, I wanted to make sure we know everybody who's here. So our panelists today, we didn't do this yet, right? Our panelists, it's going to be led by me from the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, and will be moderated by Jill Asher from the Magical Bridge Foundation. Our discussants are Carol Greenburg, a special education advocate and my co-editor at Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. Deborah Vick, who is a STEAM educator and a regional champion with the Christopher Reeves Foundation. And Ann Cohen, who is a disability and health policy consultant. And the captioning is again being provided by Maxfield Sparrow from UnstrangeMind. So we're going to get into the questions now. The first thing we're going to talk about is just in general, how can we help each other? And what we've been talking about is a lot of the social media and Facebook media tips. Now we know that there are lots of options. Unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly clear from reports in the news that a lot of people don't have access to these options. And again, that's a privilege issue that we hope to address more fully in a future webinar. But right now, we're going to talk about the fact that you really can do connections via social media and via Facebook. We're streaming this on Facebook Live right now and other ways. So I think especially a lot of people, like older people, might not be familiar with some of these aspects, and it's a good time to help people who don't know social media options like Zoom and Facebook Live to maybe help them make those work if that's not something that's happening right now. We also want to be really clear that something that is vitally important during a time when so many people are so scared and the information landscape is changing so quickly that you have to vet any information that you share or that you read. So if an information source is not a reliable source, if it's from a website that you've never heard of, if it's from a website that has so many pop-ups, it's kind of hard for you to actually access the content. That's the main point. These are things to be skeptical of, and just maybe share that with people who are sharing these web sources, these information sources with you too, and push back as gently as you need to, because we don't need more fear and misinformation right now. We need good information that's going to help us and help us get through this together and get through this while maintaining our health and safety and mental well-being. So we wanted to talk about some good disability and family websites with resources. And Ann Cohen is one of the people who's a real expert in this area. So Ann, are you ready to talk about some good family and disability websites? Ann, I can't hear
Hi,
Ann.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, thanks Shannon so much. One of the things that is so amazing about our community is the fact that for many of us, this isn't new. Being at home, being someone socially isolated, we have experience with this. And so that makes us in some ways experts. And so from the get-go, our community collectively has been organizing. We mentioned the Disability Justice Social Club. They were one of the early leaders in the Bay Area to galvanize each other and make sure that there was collective action in helping people in the community, whether it was personal care attendant services or providing access to food or psychological support in the East Bay community. And so nationally, there are a lot of other folks that have also been doing a great deal of organizing. One of which is Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, along with other coalition members who are advocating around healthcare access for people with disabilities because of concern of rationing. There is now a national hotline that is developed by the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. They have organized folks for years around natural disasters, and they are taking a lead in this, and I will be posting that information. That phone number is 800-626-4949, and they also have an email address, so I will be sharing that in the chat. So we are very fortunate that our national and disability rights leaders and local leaders and others have been taking the lead to make sure that folks are supporting our community. And again, we'll be sharing additional resources throughout this talk.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. We also wanted to share the fact that Thinking Person's Guide to Autism has a resource page that is currently at the top of our page, and I just shared it in the chat for the entire panel, that lists a lot of these resources that Anne is talking about, and also some ones that I'm going to talk about right now. But if you have more resources that you want us to share, you can add those in the Q&A, you can add those in the chat, you can email me at Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, and we'll include them and update our list. But one of the things that we found is really helpful, and I'm coming from my perspective in the autism community and as the parent of a young adult with autism and intellectual disability, is things like social stories and family stories explaining what's going on in non-threatening and clear ways. So you can see social stories explaining COVID-19 for students with disabilities, developmental disabilities, who currently need to more reassurance and more explanations that perhaps they can go over again and again for why they currently cannot go back to school and why they currently have to stay at home. So if you go on again to the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism website, we have social stories there, both for students who are missing their school and for students who live in group homes, because that is a reality in our community, who are having to stay in their group homes and are currently not able to visit their families. So next we wanted to talk about, sorry, I'm looking at the question list. One of the things that we're seeing right now, unfortunately, this is something that happens in times of crisis, is an uptick in interpersonal conflict resolution while people are sequestered at home. And Deborah, are you ready to talk about this? Deborah, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm having a technical challenge. Something happened. It's not going live right this second. But I will start. Right now, one of the things that we're seeing across the world actually is an increase in domestic violence. Because people don't necessarily have the skills that they need to communicate to resolve conflict resolution, or those that are already being oppressed by somebody in their household, that safe haven is becoming a conflict because of all the stress that adds on. The increase is actually overwhelming a lot of the organizations that assist people that have women that are being battered or other issues that be having to do with domestic violence, be it emotional, sexual, or verbal or physical. All have seen an uptake in numbers. Just recently, there was a New York Times article also focusing on it. I think it's up about 18% in some areas in the numbers of calls that are coming in for help. So the one thing we want to recognize is that, yes, we are supposed to be sheltering in place. However, there is an exception. If your shelter in place is in an unsafe area, There are places for you to call, to reach out to, that they can help you try to find another location to shelter in place, but in a safe place for you and your family. So we're going to share some of those resources with you guys so that you have a place to contact if that's something that you need to be able to do.
Okay, great, thank you so much. This is a concern, and we just want to say that if you know somebody who you think is in danger or is having a rough time with interpersonal conflict in their home, there are ways you can reach out to them and check on them and just try and look out for the people in your lives who you think may be at risk here, even if it's just to listen to them, okay? So next, we wanted to talk about, with Anne, about some of the issues that are happening with people who are co-parenting, which is an especially difficult complication during this time. So Anne? Anne, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I'll unmute you. Oh, yeah.
Okay, you're good to go, Anne.
Hi, thanks so much, Shannon. I want to acknowledge the fact that as a woman with a disability, we experience higher rates of domestic violence. And so it can be incredibly scary to be co-parenting, even once you're divorced and no longer in the household, or for folks that are currently living together and co-parenting. And so, you know, the biggest thing, advice I can express is that it can be incredibly hard to have coping strategies. And so there are things you may have to do in terms of expressing some of your needs, explain to your child that stressful situations can be incredibly difficult. And so seek help. One of the best groups in the Bay Area that I know of is Women SV. They have an ongoing support group and a number of resources for folks. It is incredibly helpful, and so please reach out to them. We shared the link above. I will be doing that again as well. But be gentle on yourself. If you're afraid, if you're scared, if you feel like that you can't fully express your concerns with your partner regarding co-parenting, it's understandable. For many of folks that have left, that have felt like they're going through a good co-parenting relationship, there may currently be a strain. I want you to know that you do have rights, and that many members in our community that are experiencing that have been documenting their concerns, so that if they need to engage experts in the legal field afterwards or during this crisis, that they do have that information documented. So I just want to acknowledge that it is a challenging time for everybody, but there are resources to support you.
Okay, thank you, Anne. The last part of this question that we wanted to talk about is the importance of maintaining calm and competent and structured environments with your children. So basically, it's really important to model good behavior under these stressful circumstances, because a lot of our children, especially our autistic children, are emotional resonators. So they're going to take any emotions that you're feeling and amplify them and possibly throw them back at you, which is not their fault. So even if it's difficult, it's important to try and be as calm as we can, as structured as we can, and maybe take more time away from each other if that's possible. If you can, that's okay. Cope however you can, okay? So now we wanted to go on to the next section, which is about strategies for addressing everyone's needs in close and stressful quarters, and also while supporting disabled family members. So one of the things that happens in any family, but is especially important to notice in our families with people with disabilities, is that we have what are called competing access needs. And that's when one person's accommodations needs conflict with somebody else's accommodations needs. And so I can talk about this in my own family. We have people who really like to make a lot of noise, and we have other people who have hypersensitive hearing for whom noisy environments are triggers that make them unable to do anything. And I think people probably understand that I'm euphemizing here. I'm being, So competing access needs are real. And while I don't think it's possible to absolutely accommodate everybody, we have to be aware that those competing access needs exist. And so if one of your children is making noise and the other one is freaking out, that's a real situation. You have to address both of those issues. You can't just yell at one kid to shut up and tell the other kid not to be so sensitive. That's completely disregarding their disability accommodations needs. We have to do what we can to try and keep everybody's needs met. And again, this is not easy, and I'm about to post an article from Thinking Person's Guide to Autism on the chat, but please consider that these competing access needs are real, and try not to blame your children for having conflicting disabilities. So right now, Carol, if you're ready, was going to talk about anxiety and self-care during these times. Carol?
Sure. There's a lot I could address here. Just to the issue of competing access needs, both my son and I are autistic. My son is a sensory seeker. I am a sensory avoider. So that's a very good example of competing access needs. However, I am an adult and he is my son. So quite frankly, I'm more capable of finding alternatives for what I need, and his needs kind of have to trump my needs, if you'll allow. So that's one thing. Also, about anxiety, it's hard not to make assumptions. Yes, it's true that those of us who are autistic, or those of us who for any other, but most of us who are autistic have lifelong anxiety and depression co-occurring conditions. It's just part of the nature of living in a world that's not built for you. So it's a very, very big deal in the autism community, okay? And in terms of having had to deal with this my whole life, and my son having to deal with it his whole life in his way, we do have more practice, and that can be good. On the other hand, because we're autistic and other people's emotions are extremely contagious to us, that makes it harder, especially when we're in quarantine. One thing you need to remember is that your autistic child, may be feeling very anxious, but may have trouble expressing why they're feeling anxious. However verbal or not verbal they are, whatever level of AAC they can use, it's still very difficult for all of us. All autistics have some level of communication difficulty. So if your child is anxious, you should not necessarily jump to any conclusions about the exact root of the anxiety. What we hear from the experts is that transitions are very difficult for autistics, and that changes in routine are very difficult for autistics. And that is generally true. However, one thing that I recently wrote about in Thinking Person's Guide to Autism was the fact that when I poke my head outside the door to see if it's okay for me to go outside, at first I thought, okay, this is a big change. What we've been taught about how to properly socialize is that we should greet people, we should be willing to shake hands, we should stand a not too far distance away, we should make eye contact. All of that has been turned over on its head right now because of social distancing. Now that's a big disruption in all of our routines, but that is not the only problem with it in terms of anxiety. We autistics tend to be rule followers. Sometimes that's because we've been trained since birth by compliance training like ABA to follow the rules lest we face a terrible negative consequence. And it may also be sort of an autistic trait. I don't know how much it's caused by one thing or the other. But the point is that there are rules that are worth following. And one of them right now that is appropriate in this context is social distancing. I, for one, stuck my head out the window and thought, I can get used to a totally different rule. I've been having to get used to rules that haven't made sense to me my whole life. I can do this. But then I looked out the window and I stepped outside, all prepared to follow these new rules of social distancing. And I saw that half the people around me weren't following the rules. And that's what absolutely drove me up and down the wall. I had a meltdown and had to run home so that I could finish the meltdown at home.
I'm so sorry, Carol. Deborah, you're coming at self-care from a different angle. Are you ready to talk about what that means for you? You're muted right now, Deborah.
For the Facebook, I'm still trying to figure out what's the challenge right now, but I'll go back to that in a minute. So yeah, so self-care for me is challenging in a couple ways. I'll talk about some things that I do to help myself afterwards, but the challenges that I have multiple disorders, all of them affect me cognitively and physically and can lead to me passing out or just being bedridden for days at a time. And so knowing how to manage my pain and all of the secondary things that come with it, from not being able to eat or problems with vomiting or any kind of whole host of things that could occur, becomes a challenge because the kids that I care for, both of my children have challenges of their own, many times become my caregiver. And so learning how to try to find that balance is really hard. And so the one thing that I always try to remember is that a car without any gas isn't going anywhere. So I kind of try to remember that I have to refuel myself, have to find the ways to take that time so that I have the energy to be able to care for my children without, everybody knows when you're in more pain, you're less patient and you can be more agitated quickly. So that I try to do these things so that when I am at the highest levels, I am not overburdening my children, and they have come accustomed to it to the point when I am in extreme pain and mom is not always acting the proper way. They'll remind me to meditate and relax and so forth. One of the things, and that goes back to modeling what we want our behavior to be so that we model what we want so that our children know how to do that back, which we're working on. And for me, I do self-care things to keep on taking care of myself so that we can all do that. I would like to remind people there's lots of different means for self-care. It may be meditations. There's a lot of free programs for meditations right now. Yoga, self-journaling, art programs, crafting, there's all sorts of things. So we can go into that another time. I don't want to take up all this time here. I will share a resource later of some free meditation and yoga sites as well.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Another thing that we've been talking about is the changing expectations for our children, both socially and at schools, and in some cases, how that's leading to some shaming from some parent angles and how we're dealing with that. And so, Deborah, I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so it's a challenge when you are a parent with a disability and you need to have certain things taken care of to work with your child. And we're not necessarily able to do the same education with the children at home. We don't have the same energy to do it at home. We may not be able to have physically, mentally, or cognitively be able to do it at the time zone that it needs to be done in. And not being made to feel that we're making the wrong choice because we can't do it in that particular box. Okay. We need people to be able to see from the outside. I encountered challenge and people did work with me, but it wasn't understood why I took my son out of school 2 weeks prior to the school's closing. But I had to do that because I have, although I'm not wearing it right now, I am mostly oxygen dependent with lungs that work at less than, on a good day, 50% functionality, besides having numerous autoimmune diseases. So should he get anything, I would very likely be hospitalized and needing a respirator. And I'm not over exaggerating. I mean, the flu shot put me in the hospital for 2 days. So, and that was an issue that I had to go up against. And it was a challenge because people didn't understand why I was pulling him out of school, and neighbors didn't necessarily know it. I had people kind of thinking I was overreacting at that point. And it's something that happens a lot when people don't understand why something happens. And I know Carol had talked about when you go out with your son and he needs to go out, people are making a judgment right away that, oh, there's not social distancing, instead of waiting and trying to understand the situation. So the one thing that I want to pass on to everybody is that we all have a challenge. We're all battling something, and to take the moment to learn what somebody's challenge or battle is before we make our judgments, because more likely than not, you will be able to help and understand it a lot better.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Anne, did you want to add to this? There you go, Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that as parents with disabilities, we always have this expectation, at least I do, I know many of my friends do, where we feel like everybody else does more than us. And if we're having a difficult day and we have to be homebound and we have to take care of ourselves, that somehow we're failing as parents. And so it's kind of odd because now we are all in the same situation. We all are working from home. So to some degree, we all have a level playing field. We've seen folks that have been stressed out working from home with their kids. And so to some degree, we've become the experts at that. But at the same time, we physically may not be able to keep up with everything in the household. And so being gentle with ourselves, reminding ourselves that we can't be perfect, we don't expect to be perfect, and that our disabilities have taught our children how to be mindful of how to treat people with respect and how to cherish all the various things you can do in life without having to be the super parent. There are amazing resources for parents. One is the Disabled Parenting Project. They have an incredible blog. I've blogged for them before, I'll share the link. And then the other thing is relying on each other. So Deborah Vick and I became friends through this. We actually have the same rare form of muscular dystrophy autoimmune condition. It's very hard to find folks that have that condition. And we randomly met each other through this panel. So we've actually been calling each other every few days. And one of the funny things is that we have different strategies. So when her son was acting out and throwing things, I got on the FaceTime with her and said, hey, I'm watching you, and he sort of paused and stopped and said, hey, do you want to get through this? When you're done with this, I'll get you a reward. And we went one step further. I did this with my son. Deborah and I are both Jewish, and we joke about the Jewish mom guilt trip that our Jewish mothers would say, if you act that way, I curse you, may you have a child that's the same. And we both have sons that have similar disabilities, ADHD and sensory issues. And so I looked at her son, and I had done this with my son, and of course, it's jokingly, and I said, hey, I'm watching you, and if you don't stop, you may have a child just like you. And we went into the whole history of Jewish guilt tripping. And we ended it by saying, if there's two of us watching you at the same time, the pact is sealed. And, little kids are all into imaginary play. And he looked and he stopped and he goes, oh, I'm going to be good. I'm not going to do that. And then, in the case of him and my son, they went on and asked, is that what you did to your parents? So coming up with creative strategies to diffuse that tension can really help make things easier.
Okay, thank you so much, Anne. One of the things, though, that goes along with this kind of topic of parent shaming and judgment and coping is the fact that for some of us, it actually does kind of spiral into self-harm. And while this is something that, and aggression and domestic violence, and while we covered that a little bit already, Carol, I was wondering if you could talk about this just a little bit more.
Okay.
Carol and then Deborah, just about how the stress and anxiety and the judgment and how it is, this perfect storm for people who are struggling right now and how we can still get through this.
Yeah, it is a vicious circle. you know, there's no way you can take everything that means everything to your kid who can't, and not necessarily be able to communicate exactly why or when it will resume, and not have the kid have a lot of feelings about that. And if the kid has trouble communicating those feelings in a way that is that does not involve any sort of aggression, eventually that's going to kind of fall apart. And so there may be some self-harm or even aggression towards other family members. That's almost inevitable. The best thing to do in a situation like that, if it's a self-harm behavior, depending on what it is, you may or may not have to intervene. If it's an aggression towards another member of the family, you need to get both people separated and give them time and space to cool down before they can get together in some way again, socially, you know, with some physical distance, but still able to talk to each other again, and or communicate in some way to each other again, and sort of mend it, mend whatever happened. I don't know if that's too general or
No, that's actually really helpful, because especially I think one of the things that people are, I think, preoccupied with right now is the idea that, you know, pandemic fear and the stress that's caused by all of these changes, especially for those of our kids who really thrive on routine and who really thrive in their schools, for those autistic children who buck the stereotypes and are actually extroverts and are desperately missing their social scenes.
that's my son.
I think one of the things that is missing here is that people are forgetting that everything else that we were dealing with before is still going on. So one of the things I think that our audience here and our community really needs to remember is that our kids with disabilities are still humans who have co-occurring conditions. So for instance, you know, my son is autistic, and so we have to be really careful to remember that, you know, he can still get sick. He can still have things like, you know, heartburn or a hurt ankle or something like that, that can change the way he's reacting, can change the way he's behaving. And we have to consider those potential when we think about like what is going on with him right now. He's obviously upset. You know, we can't just blame the disability. We can't just blame autism. We have to remember that our kids have other things going on too. And the, you know, parents who are disabled themselves, like our panelists, are aware of this. But a lot of people in our audience are professionals and parents who might not have disabilities themselves. Now, transitioning from that, Deborah, if you're ready, we talked a little bit about how this storm of stressors is having some negative effects on parents who are already having problems coping. And I was wondering if you're okay talking about that a little bit and talking about coping strategies. But right now, Deborah, okay, there you go.
So yes, thank you very much. Yes, so first of all, stress in general is a challenge for people, obviously, and especially in enclosed quarters. Anne and I have disorders that are impacted by stress. In fact, all three of my disorders say to take it slow, which I'm still working on the whole pacing thing, and reduce stress, because stress was triggers for a myasthenia gravis crisis or dysautonomic crisis and increase in pain. I mean, reality is the more stressed you are, the more pain you're going to be in. For people like there's another panelist and myself here who have Ehlers-Danlos and our joints dislocate and our muscle sublux, I mean, spasm, and getting stressed is only going to make that worse. For me, when I get really stressed, it completely, my whole body will just shut down and I won't be able to function at all, even get out of bed. So I've been trying to figure out ways to help myself reduce stress and then also help my children reduce their stress. And one of the things is I've been a mediator before, and I try to use the mediation type speaking with my children so that if there is an issue, whether it's with each other or me, having them take turns writing if they have something to say, we take turns speaking. If they want to wait, if they have something to say, they write it before interrupting the other person, to give each person a chance to speak and to hear each other. I try to mirror that with them so that when there is a problem, they can come back and discuss it in a much more calm way. One of my children has ODD, and there are times that he will go from 0 to 180, and it'll take a long time to help him see the other person's perspective. And sometimes we have to stop and walk away and do something else, and then come back, simply because the anger is so raw. He won't be able to process and hear what I'm saying. And so we'll just have to take it, or I'll get too upset that he's not hearing what I'm saying. And that's happened before too, where I say, Mommy needs a timeout now, you know, and I've taken timeouts because I would be getting too agitated about doing, because of pain or what have you. And for all those people who do have issues, that really, when you realize you do make a mistake, it's very important that you apologize to your children and recognize that, yep, Mom was in a lot of pain and I yelled then at that point, and that wasn't the best way to communicate with you, and I'm sorry. And I do that with my children so they understand adults make mistakes, and that, you know, the form of communication I chose was not what I want for them to do, and it's not what I want to do. So trying to teach them that has been a very important thing for me to do. So I don't want to take up the whole there, but
thanks, Deborah. No, those are all really important points. Jill wanted to ask a question right now before we move on to our next point.
So a couple things. Just as a reminder, if there are specific questions that anyone has, there is a Q&A bubble at the bottom of the screen, and you can ask questions. And we're going to do our best to get those questions to our panelists. There's been a lot of comments also about you know, schools being closed right now, and that a lot of the students that are on IEPs or that have disabilities are not receiving their regular services.
Yep.
And that there seems to be a lot of meltdowns happening in the homes because there isn't sort of this consistency of classes, of socialization. And so I'm hoping, and it seems like there's a lot of questions about this, that we can just sort of address those specific meltdowns and how people are handling those inside of the home. And again, many of the families, you know, we're not trained therapists to, you know, to handle this. And I'm hoping our community is hoping to answer some of those questions.
That is true. We are not trained therapists, but in the case of at least Carol, who's autistic herself, and me, we have teenage autistic high support, partially speaking sons. So we get this. Both of our sons are extremely upset. Both of our sons require one-to-one support in their schools and at home. Both of our sons are extremely upset by this change in their routine. Carol, I don't know what your son is saying specifically, but my son asks to go on the bus every day. And so I would say that, and Carol, you can add to this.
Yeah.
But the first thing I would say is, do not expect your child to take to this transition easily. Change is really, really hard for our kids, for autistic people in general. And we have to be patient. I would say, be as hands-off as you can with any way that they need to self-soothe. I would say that if they're needing to stim a lot more, if they're, you know, hand flapping, tearing paper, whatever they need to do, you know, you don't want people judging you if you are binge watching or stressed right now. So please don't judge your children for how they're coping. I would say that if you can put as much structure in their life as possible, like use a visual schedule. If they read, do a printed schedule. And most importantly, you be a reliable person who sticks to that schedule and doesn't change it. You need to be a person that they can trust, because everything else has been pulled out from underneath them. So to the best of your ability, you need to provide that structure. Carol, what did you want to add?
A lot. for my son, it's because I'm a New Yorker, we're New Yorkers, he's a Brooklyn boy, so what he wants to do most is ride the subway.
So Carol, just make sure you pace a little bit.
Oh, sorry, I'm a New Yorker. I talk really fast. I'm trying really hard.
Oh, I hear you.
Max. Okay, so we're New Yorkers, so it's not the train, it's not the bus, it's the train. When are the trains going to, when is he going to be able to ride the train again, by which he means the subway? Because Manhattan is his playground. And he's not used to not being able to go into Manhattan and do all the things he loves to do, or go into other parts of Brooklyn, which he does with an aid. My son is also a runner, not in the sense of he's constantly trying to escape the house and putting himself in danger. My son is literally, you know, he's running 5Ks, he runs 5 miles a day at school on the treadmill. He trains, he's a marathon runner, he's a sprinter. He's used to being extremely physically active, and he's a very talented athlete. This has been all pulled out from under him. We do have a virtual reality headset at home. It's expensive, but it's well worth it to us. I know it's not necessarily possible for everybody to get it, but if you can get funding for something, this is a great thing for your sensory seekers. That's been helpful to him. One thing I wanted to add about this, because we had talked about shaming and aids and having your kids outside and being afraid that your kid will be shamed. My son's aides are all in their 20s, because even if we had had him in our 20s, we never could have kept up with him. They're all big, long-legged people who can keep up with him. His aides are the reason he is able to social distance from other people. So in order for him to keep a safe social distance, he needs to have an aide who can keep up with him, and sometimes be a little lax on the social distance between him and the aide so that he doesn't run over to other people. So that sort of thing, there's the sort of thing where we have to do a little compromising. He's in the aide's orbit every day. Maybe that's not perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than him running ahead of anybody and breaking social distance with everybody in the neighborhood.
Got it. Thank you so much, Carol. We only have about 12 minutes left, so I want to move on so we can make sure we cover all these really important topics. But another thing about the social aspects of staying home that some people might not have thought about is the role of allergies and environmental factors. And Anne, would you be willing to talk about that?
Sure. A big part of the disability community is acknowledging chemical sensitivities. And in a lot of our events, we talk about not wearing perfumes, being careful about cleaning supplies are used in meeting spaces. That's now all out the window. CDC guidelines talk about using bleach. For many folks, including myself with autoimmune conditions, that can be really problematic. So we're not here to go against CDC guidelines, but doing things to ensure that those spaces are still safe for you. So if you do have to use bleach, opening the windows, being outside until the environment airs out, are things that I have done. But again, this may be the new normal moving forward. And so disability groups and others are going to have to reformulate how do you balance the safety of the public with the needs of folks with environmental allergies. So for your own sake, I know there's a lot of sort of vinegar-based things and things that have been talked about. Some of those aren't necessarily proven, but just be aware of that moving forward.
Okay. So thank you so much, Anne. And we wanted to just mention here, just to go back to Carol's, talking about her son being so incredibly active. There are a lot of online resources for our kids, like, things like museums and science academies and zoos where you can take virtual visits. And again, it's not the same thing as being there, but this is something to give them some place to quote unquote go. Okay. So now we wanted to kind of move on and talk about the resources that people should know about during these times that can be helpful for you. So Carol, could you talk a little bit about the importance of local resources?
Yeah, I've been very politically involved just in a general sense in leading up to 2018 elections. And that has really helped me learn who are the people in my neighborhood, meaning who are the institutions, who are the public servants, who are the local elected officials, who I now know quite well. So I know if I have a particular problem in my area, it's better for me to go to, in New York City, we call them our city council members or our city assembly members. They're the, I hate to put it this way, but the lower level people. I don't want to be sending emails to Mayor de Blasio, to the mayor of my big city right now. I'd rather be sending emails or making calls to my local city council member who I worked on his campaign, you know, who I know personally and I know has a reputation for getting things done. Also, you don't get elected to local office unless you are very, very involved in your local community. So always try to go local first in the political sense. Also, in the private sense, there are all kinds of social service organizations like Lions Club, Kiwanis Club, Rotary Club that are delighted to provide all kinds of services. Look up your local Kiwanis, Rotary, any sort of club, Knights of Columbus. There's Parents Helping Parents. This is a national organization, a national volunteer organization that you can just look it up online under parent-to-parent.org, I believe.
PHP.
I'm sorry?
PHP.
PHP, yeah. Parents Helping Parents. We also have Parent-to-Parent New York
Oh,
State.
sorry.
Yeah. And there's centers for independent living that you can look to. You can look to local foundations. You might want to check out the foundationcenter.org, which can then get you in touch with your local foundations.
Okay, great. So Carol, I'm just going to interrupt now just because we don't have a whole lot of time left. These are all really important resources, but we need to get to some of the final questions.
Okay,
So,
just one more thing.
Sure.
If you look to religious organizations, even if you don't belong to that particular religion or any religion, most religious organizations will help people in need no matter what belief system they're coming from. Okay, done.
Thank you, Carol. I also just wanted to mention quickly that the Boys and Girls Club is another national organization and is specifically helping people who are having problems with food security right now. So if your children or you are needing food, they are helping with that. So another issue that is really of concern to the disability community right now is the concept of medical rationing, the concept that either we parents or our children will not get the same medical care as a person without a disability because of that disability. And even though the federal government has declared this illegal, it's still a concern. And Anne, could you please take this on and explain why this is such a concern and what we can do about it?
Absolutely. You know, it's a really dramatic concern for our disability community. We're afraid for our lives, frankly. For those that are oxygen...
I do need to slow down a little bit, please.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of us that are oxygen dependent or use ventilators, this is a particular concern. They are afraid that those devices will be taken away from them because their lives are seen as already fragile and provided to somebody else. So there's a lot of new things going on around medical ethics. There is a lot of work being done by the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund and others around advocacy in this area and provider education. I'm going to post 2 links, both of their policy writing to know and understand your legal rights, as well as a kit they put together that gives advice about what documents you should bring if you do go to the hospital, about what things you can communicate to your provider. Those are all very important things. And so while everybody is afraid, please be sensitive to the fact that this is uncharted territory for the medical system as a large in terms of the capacity of the healthcare system. However, it is an ongoing fear that our disability community has had for years about our access to medical care. So again, there are folks that are advocating on your behalf. So I want to make you aware of those resources.
Thank you so much, Anne. So moving on from there, we wanted to now go and talk about something a little more light-hearted, which is activities to do when you're sheltering at home with the family members with disabilities. And Deborah has some ideas. This is actually her area of specialty. So Deborah?
So, okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, great. So, we have a couple of other links, by the way, for resources for disability organizations and advocacy. And I just was following up on that real quick on that before we change the fun stuff. There's also National Disability COVID-19 Healthcare Support Advocacy Hotline as well, and some Patients with Empathy for California, and also patients pain advocate warriors organizations to help people. Some of those organizations are the ones I volunteer with. But today I'm also going to talk about the fun things, making some fun time at home. So we don't have a regular school day. Even if we try to keep a schedule, which I know a lot of us do, I'm not as good at that one with my child right now. We're still struggling on that. We're looking at what we do. I mean, it's STEAM, which means science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, can be a lot of fun. It does not require you to have special equipment or a chemistry box or anything like that. The first thing I will say is to take a look at your household and take a look at the person who you want to help. Is it, look at the abilities of the person that has a disability. What is their disability? How do they learn best? What is the things that keep them the most interested in? For my children, they are both hands-on, very hands-on. So we always have makerspace style activities in my household. I have different boxes for different types of things. Arts and crafts box for hopefully calming down a little bit and settling down. Both my children love my chemical reaction activities. So I have a box of supplies for chemical reactions. You'd be surprised, most of the stuff are household things like popsicle sticks and baking soda and cornstarch and other Alka-Seltzer tablets. I mean, things like that can really make a fun kit. And I'll be starting to do a blog with another gentleman for the Magical Bridge to share these ideas with you guys. Another box to make could be a sensory box. I especially had that when my boys were younger. Although recently that sensory box we've been doing again, and my son still loves it. And that has different types of things of flubbers and textured type of sands and doughs and things. And whatever it is your child or adult, whoever it may be, needs, you try to think of them, think outside the box, not necessarily what some direction tells you, but think about how you can best help them.
Okay, thanks so much, Deborah. We actually only have a few minutes left. So I just wanted to really quickly address the concept that for a lot of our kids, again, not everybody has online access right now, but a lot of our kids are not necessarily self-starters. So for a lot of Deborah's ideas, these are things that you might want to present to your kids and see how they take to it. And also understand that, again, for our children who are not into transitions and who are not into change, you might need to just introduce them maybe several times, because they might not want to do it at the first time, but maybe eventually they might like it. And this is different from forcing them to do it, obviously. This is presenting them with the option to refuse several times. Also, there are a lot of online options for entertainment, for activities, for children of all developmental and communication abilities. And a lot of these are included in the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism resources for COVID-19. So I think another thing, again, that Carol talked about are active kids. And right now it's really, really hard to have an active kid. We're very fortunate in that our neighborhood park has not closed for hiking. It's not a playground park, it's a hiking park. But most of the other parks in our area are closed. And so some of our children in our community really require a lot of activity, not only just because it's who they are, like Carol's son, but because it's crucial to their ability to self-regulate. So I would say just be as creative as you can in getting your child exercise any way you can. And again, we have ideas for this at the TPGA thing. But just in closing, Deborah, you talked about, while we were discussing this, about, you know, being realistic about defining success while you're parenting during these shelter at home times. Did you want to talk about that?
I will. No, 1 second. I know what did want to add. I'm sorry for this Facebook. It keeps on shutting off. I'm not sure why. So we have recorded this so we can share it too. 2 things. One, just to step quick back, I know we're talking about how we adapt our activities for our loved ones. One thing I would suggest also is include them in the process.
Absolutely.
When I work with my scouts, a lot of times I'll have people who won't want to get out of a car to sell popcorn one time, but he was willing to come and help me collect money. And then before we knew it, he was up front by the door selling popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's a baby step. Sometimes it's just taking that tape and putting that in the box because you're going to get to make something out of cardboard later.
Yeah.
Right? Taking it slow and slow introductions, maybe what needs to be done, and be patient with it. And that kind of leads into redefining success. Success for us may not look like the same for somebody else. For people who have chronic illnesses, success may be redefined hourly because our norm can change from minute to minute. Abilities change. So not judging yourself for not being able to do everything you want to do. I say that, but I will be perfectly honest, it's not an easy thing to do. And there are plenty of times that I do not think of myself as a good mother because I can't do everything that I used to do. So yes, it's still a raw thought for me, yet my children in their eyes, I'm super mom because of everything I do despite my challenges. So, you know, it's very relative, right? In our children's eyes, they see it differently. I see everything that I can't do anymore, and they see everything that I am doing still. And so it's really important that, one, we're not so hard on ourselves. If we're really too hard on ourselves, we'll pass that on to our loved ones. They see that, and may likely do the same thing and be hard on themselves. So we want to teach empowerment and recognition and acceptance of what we can do. So on that note, I always talk about the redefinition of success. When we do SMART goals, it's the same thing. Is it realistic? Is it, you know, the timetable, the SMART, I'll talk about another time, but part of the SMART goal is looking at whether something is realistic. So look at what you set for your goals. Is it realistic? And can you accomplish it? And on a timeline, is that possible for you guys? If it's not, then make something that is realistic for you and your loved ones, not what's realistic for somebody else. You know, in Cub Scouts, our motto is do your best. And I pretty much try to teach that all the time to my kids and go with the words, I can do it and I will do it. And I'll just find my own way of getting there. And it may not be the same path as somebody else, but we'll eventually get to there.
I'm going to just interject here for just a second. We were scheduled to end this webinar 4 minutes ago, but we are going to keep this going because it seems like there's a lot of continued questions happening. Just a couple points to just add to this conversation here is that at Magical Bridge, we heard loud and clear from our community that the shelter in place was really difficult, especially for many families, especially with those with disabilities, but for everyone. So we also are offering free family-friendly concerts every day on the Magical Bridge Facebook page. They are recorded as well, so you can go back and look at them. There'll be a concert coming up in 20 minutes or so. But also Deborah Vick and our team are going to work on putting together resources just of activities, things that are fun to do with your families, whether they're young or young at heart. There'll be a resource list that will go up on the Magical Bridge blog, and we'll continue to update it. And there'll be a lot of STEM and STEAM activities as well. for you to do at home. So we'll be posting that. You know, I want to just ask some questions here that are coming in from our community, because there seems to be a lot of these questions about the fact that, you know, this shelter in place means that for all of us, we are now in homeschooling our children, and it seems to be that there's a real urgent need for support in homeschooling our kids with disabilities, and that people are just not doing it right at this point. And I just wanted to see, you know, maybe Shannon or Carol, if you're able to just sort of address that issue, because I know this is new for all of us. But how do we homeschool now our children, especially those with disabilities that are on IEPs that don't have, you know, their regular support?
Okay, so I do want to hand this over to Carol, but I want to point out to the audience that Carol is not just a parent, an autistic person, parent of an autistic teenager. She is a special education advocate. So your rights under the IDEA are actually Carol's area of expertise. So Carol?
Okay, well, remember before when I said go local first and then go bigger? That doesn't always work out so well when it comes to your rights under IDEA, under IDEA, because it depends upon the nature of your relationship, your whole past relationship with your district and your school. If you send your child to a public school and you get everything through the public school and you always had a contentious relationship with the public school and the district, now might not be the best time to necessarily reach out. If, on the other hand, you've always had a good relationship and successful, productive IEP meetings, your local folks may be the right people to reach out to first for a given service. Also, one thing you have to keep in mind is, what are your state laws? Because laws on how IDEA is implemented there are federal laws on how IDEA is implemented. However, states have laws on how IDEA should be implemented and can vary quite a bit. So you really need to check out not only IDEA on a federal level, but also your Department of Education for your state, and see if there's any variance. Now, unfortunately, we used to have OSEP, the Office of Special Education, on a national level, that you could trust their information. Right now, their information on a national level, they've removed a lot of information about IDEA. Our current person is not a very reliable source of good information. So, be careful when you check out there's a lot missing that used to be there on our national site. So you may want to go to your state site on how your state is dealing with things also for that reason. There are two national organizations that I would recommend that can point you towards, if you're an educator especially, but even if you're a parent, the Council for Exceptional Children, which is CEC.S as in Sam, P as in Paul, E as in egg, D as in do.org. Council for Exceptional Children is a good place to look. They have a webinar right now that is designed mostly for educators of special education, of children in special education, but they also have a list of resources for people who are looking for special education advice in general. So that's a good place to go if you're just looking for kind of general across the board questions, and they might be able to direct you to a local chapter. The other organization of which I'm a member is the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates, COPAA.org. So if you need somebody specific, they have, basically you type in your zip code and you're looking for, say, an advocate in private practice, which I am. And they have essentially yellow pages of people who can provide whatever you're looking for. Most of us do charge who are in, you know, private practice, but they also have all kinds of resources. You just type in your zip code.
Thanks, Carol.
Oh, we were just called for an IEP meeting for our son. You used to be able to just do it over the phone. Now they're going to do it via video conference. It's going to be really hard on me, but that's what it looks like I'm stuck with.
Okay, thank you. So Carol, so homeschooling though is an entirely separate issue. I mean, we are protected by our rights, but that doesn't necessarily tell us what to do with our kids at home. And one of the things that I've tried to keep in mind is that these are unprecedented times for everybody. And things are changing day to day, and your school might not have quite caught up with what they need to do to properly support you and your child at home. I would again say, please be patient and let your kid do whatever they need during this time to compensate and cope, and that's okay. But keeping that in mind, schools are moving online. The issue that I'm facing, and Carol, I don't know if you or any of the other panelists have encountered this with your kids, is that, you know, they're moving online and trying to do a lot of online curriculum the way that we're doing this online meeting here. And my son's response is no, thank you. And we're fortunate in that they've been doing this for at least 2 weeks. And with the exception of one morning calendar interaction time, all of the rest of it, he is absolutely not interested in it, because that is what that's not what he does. That's not how his school goes. So in our case, we are relying on the curriculum that the school has provided for us. We're going as slowly as we can. We are, again, allowing our son the time to adapt. We are allowing him to say no if it's too weird for him, if it's not what he can cope with right now. But it's just really hard. I would say, again, just have patience to the point where it's hard for you, but also you need to keep the school liable for supplying the materials that you and your child need. The one thing, however, I do want to say, specifically for parents of young autistic children right now, is that I've seen a lot of parents kind of freaking out about the concept of their child regressing. And that's not,
It's not a thing.
Not a thing. Just please,
not. Don't worry about
be
it.
patient with your child. Please, you know, have faith in them, and do not make that one of your concerns. They are not going to lose. They're not going to lose skills. It's just not going to happen. You know, they are like any other child on a break. They're just not going to be into it. And once they go back to school, they'll start learning again, you know.
Actually, I disagree. They're not like any other child on a break. They're better equipped for this because autistics have incredibly long memories. We do not lose skills. We just don't. They go underground for a while. We behave as though we have lost the skill, and then it snaps right back into place because we have longer memories. That's how our brains are built. They don't prune as effectively or as efficiently. They don't prune neurons the way non-autistic brains do. But one of the advantages to that is that we have the memories of elephants.
Oh, yeah.
So it is not a thing. It is not to worry about. The other secret you may not know if you are not autistic yourself is that you can calm down about your kid not getting an education, even if your kid doesn't get a single bit of education from their teachers right now. Autistics are amazing autodidacts. We teach ourselves just about anything we want to learn, anything that we think will be of value in our lives, and it generally turns out to be of value to us. This is something I never worry about. Everything that my father, who is autistic, ever learned, he taught himself. Everything that I, who am autistic, ever learned, I started out by teaching myself. And my son is exactly the same way. So I never worry. Of course he gets all the services and education I can get him. But bottom line, he's going to teach himself. It's an autistic thing.
Shannon, can I add to this?
You'll give us.
Yep.
So the other thing that I would say is that we also need to be mindful of folks that use assistive technology in their learning. And one of the most challenging things is all these various platforms, are folks going to be able to access them? And so for better or for worse, many communities are using Google-based Google Classroom for their learning, not all, but some. I know in the South Bay, some of the school districts are using Google Classroom, and there are accessibility protocols with Google. So we'll be posting Google's accessible classroom page for you folks. We are not experts on accessibility, but there are folks that are. So I just want to let you know that we are sensitive to that accessibility issue and access to learning for folks as well.
Okay, and with that, I'm so grateful to you, Anne. I'm so grateful to everybody here, but we do need to wrap up. Jill, was there anything you wanted to say to kind of walk us out?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank everyone on behalf of Magical Bridge Foundation, on behalf of Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, for having you join us today, and for all of our panelists. And Max, thank you for keeping the captioning going. I hope your fingers aren't too sore. It seems like we were not able to cover all of the questions that came in, and so we are going to look at continuing this webinar and also inviting other experts and panelists to come and join us. So we'll keep everyone here posted on the next webinar. But again, we are incredibly grateful to have you join us. Clearly, there is a need for this conversation. We just posted this yesterday and hundreds of people signed up to join this webinar. So we clearly know that there is a need out there. And we want to be really thoughtful and answering your questions and bringing in our experts as well. So on behalf of Magical Bridge Foundation, I thank you. Shannon, I'll turn it over to you. But again, be well, be safe, wash your hands. We say at Magical Bridge, washing hands is magical. And we hope to see you again on our next webinar.
Great. I don't have